Imagine realizing that the feeling of being lost in the noise of the world is actually a symptom of an abandoned inner temple, asking to be rebuilt. That's what Freemasonry, at its deepest level, is really describing. Not as some secret elite, and not as the internet's conspiracy theories, but as the drama of the human soul trying to remember who it truly is. In this video, we're going to walk that path, guided by one of the most influential Masons in the spiritual philosophy of the craft. Walter Leslie Wilmshurst. Every degree, every symbol, every gesture is a step in that forgotten construction. Today, I'm going to lead you through this hidden map so you can see, step by step, how the Masonic journey was designed to transform an ordinary man into a living temple of consciousness. And what if that feeling that you were born for something bigger than working, consuming, and dying is actually the call of that forgotten temple inside you? Stay with me until the end of this video, because in the deepest part, I'm going to show you how this forgotten temple shows up in real life, through crises, emptiness, and major turning points in your own story, even if you've never set foot in a Masonic lodge. From the very first moment a seeker approaches the gateway of Freemasonry, something invisible begins to move inside him, something that doesn't come from the physical world or from the walls of a material temple, but from an inner call echoing from ancient times. For Walter Leslie Wilmshurst, whose work became one of the deepest keys for interpreting the royal art, it's exactly in that first silent movement of the soul that the true meaning of Freemasonry begins. Not in the formal meetings, not in the banquets, not in the social aspects that over the centuries have draped veils over the order's original purpose, but in that private restlessness that makes a man sense there's something more, something lost, something forgotten, something the modern world pushed aside as it sank deeper and deeper into materialism, noise, and distraction. And so, even before crossing any external doorway, the journey has already begun. Because the Freemasonry Wilmshurst describes isn't at its core an institution. It's an inner path unfolding in the heart of every human being. Before we go on, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that inner call, even without being inside a temple, an order, or a specific religion? I'm not talking about intellectual curiosity. I'm talking about that deep feeling that there's more to life, and nobody really explains it. If that's happened to you at any point, comment down below. I feel the call. Or tell me, in one sentence, how it shows up in your life. I want to read these comments because I want to understand how far this theme resonates with you. To understand this vision, we need to look at the author himself. Walter Leslie Wilmshurst, a Freemason from the early 20th century, was one of those rare initiates who could unite intellectual rigor with mystical depth. He understood that if Freemasonry had survived for centuries, it wasn't because of political power or social convenience, but because within its ceremonies, symbols, and myths, it preserved an ancient spiritual science, a wisdom older than nations, older than religions, older even than writing itself. It was a silent language, passed down not through speeches, but through gestures, rituals, and universal archetypes. And Wilmshurst realized that many members of the order, maybe most, took part in the rituals without noticing the inner richness they carried. Like someone walking through a magnificent palace with an unlit candle in their hand. His work was born from the desire to relight that flame. When you open the book, The Meaning of Masonry, it's like you're being led as a candidate approaching the temple door. The atmosphere feels like that moment at nightfall when the city slowly begins to quiet down and the spirit retreats inward to hear what usually gets drowned out by the noise of everyday life. It's in that mood that the author delivers the first fundamental truth. Freemasonry is, above all, a method of self-transformation, a process through which the ordinary man, full of fragmentation, inner conflict, and unrecognized shadows, can become an integrated, awakened conscious being. It's not enough to memorize signs or words. You have to live the rite. From the inside, every symbol is a key, every gesture is a mirror. Every degree corresponds to a stage in the great human journey toward the light. And that journey always begins at the same place, a state of spiritual ignorance. Not ignorance in a derogatory sense, but in the classic sense used by the mystery schools, the natural condition of a human being born into a material world and raised to believe he's only what he can see. Wilmshurst describes this state as a sleep, a forgetting of the true self. To him, all men begin as rough stones, full of potential, but still unshaped, still without clear awareness of their own nature. The first step in Freemasonry is to recognize that condition. Anyone who believes they already know everything can't be initiated. Only someone who admits their own inner limitation can begin the journey. But before we continue, welcome to our Esoterica Mind Portal. I'm Gabriel Alexandre, and every video on this channel is a reminder from your own soul. This is another episode in our documentary series on the hidden spirituality within Freemasonry. After this, make sure to check out the other episodes. I'm sure you're going to enjoy them, so subscribe now and turn on notifications. We've got new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Hit the like button to support our work and comment down below to decide what topic you want to see in the next video. A video on the Rosicrucians or a video on Martinism. Now, back to our journey. That's where the symbolism of the first degree begins, initiation. Wilmshurst explains that the ceremony wasn't created to impress, to look pretty, or to feel grand. It's a ritual drama that represents, in condensed form, what's happening invisibly inside the candidate's soul. When he's led with his eyes covered, that blindfold doesn't only represent a lack of physical sight, it represents the spiritual blindness that accompanies every human being until the moment they decide to walk the path of consciousness. The blindfold is the human condition. Removing it is awakening, and the moment the candidate sees the light isn't an empty metaphor. For Wilmshurst, it's a symbolic experience of the soul being born into a new level of perception. But that awakening doesn't happen all at once. Freemasonry is built like a three-step staircase, and each step corresponds to an inner stage of human psychology. In the first degree, a man discovers he's more than a body and a mind. He discovers there's a spark inside him. Something sacred, not created by circumstances, but belonging to the eternal. It's as if, for the first time, he looks at himself deeply enough to realize that the call was always there. Wilmshurst describes that moment as the beginning of true life. Initiation, then, is a birth, and every birth comes with vulnerability, uncertainty, and a sudden awareness that the road ahead is going to be challenging. At this point, the author introduces one of the most beautiful and profound concepts in his work, the temple. He explains that even though modern Freemasonry uses buildings to gather, the true temple is the human being. Every stone, every column, every tool used in the rituals represents symbolically aspects of the soul and the building of character. Solomon's temple, so often mentioned in the degrees, isn't, at least for him, a physical place, but a metaphor for an illuminated state of consciousness. So when a Mason takes part in the rituals, he isn't simply imitating something external. He's dramatizing the construction of his own inner nature. And if the inner temple isn't being built, then participating in the rites becomes nothing but empty theater, lifeless and hollow. Hold on to that image of the unfinished inner temple, because when we enter the legend of Hiram, you're going to see that it's exactly this temple that collapses, that dies, and that has to be rebuilt inside you. Wilmshurst insists that to truly understand Freemasonry, we shouldn't look outward, but inward. Every symbol points inward. The ruler represents control of time and mental discipline. The square represents moral and spiritual integrity. The compass represents the ability to limit the ego's excesses. None of this is literal. It's all psychological, spiritual. But modern man, distant from the old traditions, often doesn't see that and gets lost in formalism. Wilmshurst laments that, but he also recognizes that those who genuinely seek to understand eventually find, in the silence of the rituals, an echo that resonates deeply. So the first degree isn't the end, it's the starting point. It wakes the candidate up to the fact that there's a path, a work to be done. And that work isn't small. It's the task of a lifetime, shaping the rough stone until it becomes a perfect ashlar, ready to take its place in the temple. That demands effort, introspection, self-knowledge, the courage to face inner shadows, and above, the sincerity. Wilmshurst says Freemasonry doesn't transform anyone by magic, it only offers the map. The initiate has to walk the road with his own steps. From there, the author's narrative deepens the function of symbolism as a universal language. He explains that from the ancient mystery schools of Egypt to Hermetic and alchemical traditions, symbols were the most effective way to transmit profound spiritual knowledge without profaning it. The reason is simple. A symbol speaks directly to the soul. While words can be twisted or misunderstood, a symbol communicates in a direct, silent, intuitive way. Each human being, when contemplating a symbol, decodes it according to their own level of consciousness. Two initiates can witness the same ritual, but only the one who has already walked part of the inner path will perceive the depth of what's being presented. Wilmshurst shows that Freemasonry preserved this symbolic language with remarkable mastery. It's no accident it survived so long, even through persecution, bans, and periods of decline, because what's transmitted through symbols can't be destroyed. Even if books are lost, even if external traditions disappear, the symbol remains, waiting for the moment when someone with eyes to see and ears to hear can decipher it again. That's why he insists the reader seek not the literal meaning of the rituals, but the hidden meaning, the one that speaks of the inner drama of man on his journey to rebuild what was lost. As he goes deeper, the author expands on the mystery of the light the initiate receives in the first degree. That light isn't information, it's a state. It's the sudden perception that life has invisible dimensions, that every human being participates in a greater reality, and that there's a hidden purpose behind existence. At first, that light is fragile, like a newly lit flame that has to be protected from the winds of illusion and old habits. But if the initiate perseveres, that flame grows and begins to illuminate regions of the psyche that were previously inaccessible. That's where Freemasonry reveals itself as a deep spiritual psychology, long before modern psychology even existed. And with that comes a quiet question. If Freemasonry is a path of light, what's the final destination of this journey? Where does Jacob's ladder lead, the ladder that rises between heaven and earth? What awaits the initiate after the first degree's initial awakening? The answer doesn't come right away. It's held back, like a mystery that needs to ripen inside the reader. Wilmshurst guides the reader the same way a master guides a candidate, through stages that gradually prepare the understanding for deeper mysteries. What was once hidden on the horizon of consciousness starts to draw closer as the initiate moves into the next degree, and Wilmshurst presents this transition with the awareness that there are no artificial spiritual leaps. Everything moves in layers. The man who awakened to the light in the first degree still doesn't know what to do with it. He needs to learn how to walk with it, how to order his thoughts, how to discipline his inner life. That's why the second degree appears as a deepening, a more serious descent into inwardness, marked by the recognition that the journey isn't only emotional, but also intellectual, philosophical, and moral. The initiate has to learn how to think, how to discern, how to separate what matters from what doesn't, like a craftsman carefully choosing his tools before beginning a great work. Wilmshurst explains that while the first degree focuses on awakening, the second focuses on developing the enlightened mind, not the ordinary rational mind, always busy with comparisons, calculations, and memories, but the higher mind, capable of perceiving patterns, hidden meanings, deep relationships between events that seem disconnected. In Hermetic and Gnostic traditions, that mind is called the spiritual intellect, the faculty that sees the unseen. That's why the second degree emphasizes study, reflection, and contemplation. Not study in a purely academic sense, but study that seeks to decode the inner geometry of the human being and the cosmos. The symbolism of the tools gains strength here. The plumb, the level, the compass, the ruler. Each instrument corresponds to an aspect of refining consciousness. The rough stone that began to be shaped now becomes the object of deliberate work. Wilmshurst insists that the symbol of the stone is central. It represents the human soul before spiritual clarity. And shaping it into a cube means harmonizing every aspect of inner life. A perfect ashlar isn't just a stone with form, it's a stone with purpose. It can be placed in the temple because it's become fit for the function it's meant to serve. In the same way, the initiate who reaches the second degree begins to become ready for a greater work, one that still can't be revealed. As this explanation deepens, the narrative opens into one of the most intriguing themes in all of Freemasonry, the legend of Hiram Abiff. Wilmshurst says that to understand Freemasonry as a spiritual path, it's essential to understand this drama, not as a literal story, but as an initiatic myth, ancient in the same way the mysteries of Osiris, Dionysus, Tammuz, or Christ are ancient. In all these myths, the central figure represents the human soul, originally filled with light, wisdom, and creative power, but attacked, betrayed, or torn apart by inner forces, ignorance, fear, and disordered desire. Hiram is that figure. He represents the solar principle within man, the divine architect living in the depths of being. Wilmshurst explains that Hiram's drama isn't a stage play. It's the symbolic description of an inevitable spiritual crisis that every seeker faces at some point along the path. After the initial awakening and the intellectual development of the second degree, the soul reaches the moment when it must face its deepest shadows. That's when the initiate realizes that to rebuild the inner temple, he first has to experience a kind of death, not physical death, but the death of the ego, of illusions, of false identities accumulated over a lifetime. That symbolic death is represented in the ritual of the third degree, but its preparation begins in the inner silence of the second degree, when the initiate starts to realize that intellectual knowledge isn't enough. You have to be transformed completely, and this is where the legend's deep spiritual tragedy appears. Hiram, the master builder, is confronted by forces that want to rip from him the secret of mastery. A secret that can't be handed over by force, because it can only be earned through inner merit. When he refuses, those forces attack him, wound him, and finally kill him. Hiram's death represents the fall of the soul into the human condition, the loss of the word, the disconnection from the divine origin. The contemporary world, so deeply immersed in materialism, is living proof of that fall. And Wilmshurst suggests that if Freemasonry exists at all, it's precisely to help modern man rediscover that lost word, which isn't a literal word, but a state of being. As he describes this crucial point, the author makes us realize that spiritual progress isn't linear. It's marked by crises, ruptures, dark nights, moments of disorientation. Hiram falls. And in the fall, it feels like everything is lost. But that fall is necessary. Without it, there is no rebirth. Wilmshurst connects this drama to alchemical traditions, where the raw material must be dissolved before it can be transformed into gold. Dissolution is the death of the ego. Gold is the true self. The third degree is the laboratory of this inner alchemy. But before rebirth can happen, the meaning of that symbolic death has to be understood. The initiate, studying the legend of Hiram, isn't studying a character, he's studying himself. Every blow Hiram receives corresponds to a vice, an ignorance, a human weakness. The three forces that attack him represent three aspects of the ego that block spiritual ascent. Hiram's fall is our fall into unconsciousness. His death is that point in life when we realize we can't keep going the same way anymore. There are moments when the soul hits its limit, when everything that seemed solid collapses. Wilmshurst says that isn't failure. It's a rite of passage. Only when the old self dies can the new one be born. The author then returns to the importance of the temple. If the temple represents an illuminated state of consciousness and the builder of the temple falls and dies, that means the work is left unfinished. And that interrupted work is the central drama of human existence. Humanity lives inside an incomplete temple because the inner work still hasn't been completed. Each person, according to Wilmshurst, is called to take up the task Hiram left unfinished, rebuilding the temple of their own soul. That is the work of the master, and that's why the legend doesn't end with death, but with the search for Hiram's body, and then the search for the lost word. The second degree, however, still doesn't reveal the solution to this drama. It prepares the initiate to understand the depth of that loss. Here, the author draws a parallel with esoteric Christianity. Just as Christ is betrayed, killed, and buried, only to rise again in glory, Hiram also must descend into darkness before returning to the light. Death is necessary because the light can't be received while the lower self rules the inner temple. Only when it's sacrificed can the soul recover its higher nature. This isn't dogma. It's a profound psychological process lived by any sincere seeker at some point in life. Wilmshurst approaches this with a sensitivity that goes beyond words. He explains that Masonic ritual uses symbols and gestures to bring the initiate into contact with archetypes that awaken deep inner movements. Hiram's drama is both a spiritual memory of humanity and a mirror of the soul itself. By witnessing this drama, the initiate takes part in a kind of cosmic liturgy that has been unfolding since before history. And in that silent recognition, he understands he's standing before something far greater than a simple fraternal society. He's standing before a true science of the soul. As the narrative intensifies, the author reveals that the third degree, the culmination of this stage, isn't just a ceremony, but the revelation that death isn't the end. It's the gateway into a new way of being. Hiram's rebirth, represented ritually, corresponds to the intimate realization that there is, within man, an indestructible spark, one that can't be wounded, betrayed, or destroyed by any force. That spark is the inner master, the higher self, the light that never goes out. It was hidden, buried beneath the fall. But it's still alive. And when that light is found again, the lost word begins to rise. But before reaching that point, Wilmshurst pauses the explanation. He leaves the reader before the symbolic death, before an open mystery, as if inviting the soul to breathe in the darkness before the dawn, because the light that comes in the third degree can only be fully understood by someone who has walked through shadow. Revelation demands silence. It demands inwardness. It demands the willingness to accept that everything you thought was indispensable may have to die, so something greater can be born. It's at this threshold between death and rebirth that the author completes the spiritual preparation of the second degree, leaving the feeling that a massive truth is about to be revealed, but still can't be spoken. And it's that suspension that prepares the reader to enter the deepest part of the journey, the recovery of the lost word and the rebuilding of the inner temple. It's in that silent territory, between the fall and the possibility of ascent, that the initiate finds himself as the third degree begins to appear in consciousness. Nothing in this stage arrives with fanfare. No trumpets, no announcements, no warnings. Instead, what appears is a deep stillness, as if the soul were standing at the edge of a vast abyss, knowing it has to cross, but unable to see any bridge. Wilmshurst describes this moment as the most intimate experience of the human being. The realization that to recover what was lost, you have to descend to the deepest point within yourself. In the third degree, Freemasonry stops speaking only to the intellect and starts speaking directly to the spirit. Hiram's symbolic death isn't just told, it's lived. Not as physical death, but as the disintegration of everything small, artificial, and fragile. Anyone who reaches this stage brings the efforts of the first degree and the knowledge of the second, but now is called to abandon. Even those supports, what's about to be born can't be reached with ordinary tools. It's as if the columns of the inner temple dissolve, leaving only an empty space. A silence that invites you, but also frightens you. Wilmshurst explains that this emptying is essential, because only in the absence of the ego can the light of the higher self be perceived. The legend of Hiram becomes the map of that process. Hiram's body is searched for by the companions, but it's hidden, buried under layers of earth, just like the divine spark in man, buried under layers of personality. The search for the master's body is, in truth, the search for what was lost within the initiate himself. And that's why the third degree is considered the peak of symbolic masonry. It represents the moment when a human being realizes he has to go beyond appearances, beyond social roles, beyond the fragments he mistook for identity. It's time to wake up to what was always present, but always veiled. The ritual scene of discovering Hiram's body carries a depth that Wilmshurst interprets as the revelation of an eternal principle. When the seekers finally find the body, we realize that what seemed dead isn't destroyed. It's dormant, waiting to be raised. In the same way, the higher self never dies, it only withdraws. Recovering that symbolic body shows that the human soul, despite every fall, never lost its divine origin. It simply forgot. And that forgetting feeds the pain, the feeling of fragmentation, the relentless search for something most people can't even name. But when the master's body is found, something inside the initiate remembers. And that memory is a silent awakening. The legend, however, doesn't end with discovery. Hiram's resurrection represents the final overcoming of symbolic death, the undoing of the forces that brought him down, the victory of light over inner darkness. And it's exactly here that the lost word begins to be understood in its true nature. Wilmshurst explains that this word isn't a password, it isn't a secret term, it isn't a sound you pronounce. The lost word is lost consciousness. It's the state in which the human being lived before the fall, when the mind was aligned with the eternal. To recover the word is to recover that state. It's a progressive illumination, not a concept. The word becomes living, not spoken. The act of raising the master's body, so striking in the ritual, is interpreted by Wilmshurst as the ascent of the higher self within the initiate. The dormant energy that lay asleep awakens, rises, takes form, and that awakening isn't something that happens in a single instant. It's a process in which a person finally becomes capable of living aligned with their own essence. That's why the third degree isn't seen as an end, but as the beginning of true mastery. From this point on, the initiate isn't only called to learn, but to accomplish. The task now is to rebuild a temple that had become ruins. The rebuilt temple is the great work, and Wilmshurst devotes himself to explaining this meaning with a clarity that crosses traditions. He says that each initiate, as they move forward on the path, becomes the architect responsible for reintegrating every part of their soul. That construction is slow, patient, delicate. It can't be rushed, and it can't be done on good intentions alone. It demands vigilance, mental discipline, emotional purity, generosity, wisdom in the use of one's own vital energy. Freemasonry calls this process the work of a master, and the author sees in it a universal metaphor for humanity's evolutionary process. Everyone, in some way, is rebuilding their inner temple, even if they don't realize it. When that temple begins to rise, something new is born in consciousness, a sense of unity with all things. Wilmshurst says the true Master Mason isn't the one who accumulates knowledge. It's the one who perceives the divine presence in everything. That recognition completely changes how a person lives. The world stops looking like a collection of separate objects and begins to be perceived as a single great organism, full of meaning and invisible connections. That vision, so common in Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism, appears in Freemasonry through symbols that always point toward a greater reality. The compass becomes the image of a consciousness that embraces the universe. The square becomes the symbol of upright conduct, harmonizing earthly life with spiritual will, and the temple, finally understood, becomes the symbol of a unified soul. Wilmshurst makes it clear that this isn't theoretical, it's lived. Anyone who passes through symbolic death and awakens to the inner master feels in their own body that life changes its tone. I feel that deeply when I look back at my own story. Over and over when I look back, I realize that what felt like the end was actually a rehearsal for that symbolic death, an invitation to let go of an older version of myself that could no longer hold my soul. Your relationship with time, with challenges, with people, and with yourself transforms. Inner battles that once felt unbeatable start to dissolve in the light you've reclaimed, not because they stopped existing, but because your perspective changed. The initiate realizes true mastery isn't about eliminating shadows, it's about illuminating them. And that illumination spreads into every part of life, like the lamps of Solomon's temple, lit to symbolize the divine presence. But that individual transformation isn't the final point of Wilmshurst's message. He insists that Freemasonry doesn't exist to perfect only the individual, but to help transform humanity as a whole. His vision is deeply prophetic. He says humanity moves through cycles of fall and rebirth, just like the initiate, and that in times of intense materialism and spiritual confusion, times very much like our own. Enough people need to awaken to their inner light for the world to be carried into a new evolutionary stage. Freemasonry, according to him, preserves the memory of that process. Its rituals are symbolic models of something all of humanity must eventually live out collectively. Wilmshurst suggests, gently, that the legend of Hiram isn't only about the individual, it's also about the spiritual condition of humanity. The fall of the master represents The fall of collective consciousness. The loss of the word represents the universal forgetting of the sacred, and the resurrection represents the promise that at some point humanity will rediscover its lost light. Freemasonry is then a reminder, an echo, a ritual preservation of that spiritual destiny, not as doctrine, but as a map. When the initiate understands that, the ritual stops being just a ceremony and becomes a revelation. He realizes that every gesture he performs isn't limited to that fraternal context. It participates in a larger drama, cosmic, eternal. Rebuilding the inner temple becomes inseparable from rebuilding the outer temple, the world. And it's at this point that the third degree reaches its greatest depth, the realization that the great work isn't only personal, it's universal. The temple Solomon built is a symbol of the cosmos, and the initiate is called to collaborate in the harmony of that great temple. Wilmshurst concludes by saying, Freemasonry is essentially a path of return, a return to the light, a return to the true self, a return to the spiritual purpose of existence. But this return isn't a closed circle, it's an ascending spiral. You return to the point of origin, but on a higher level of consciousness. What was once sought in darkness is now contemplated in clarity. The lost word stops being a mystery and becomes a way of being, and the initiate, fully awakened, realizes the journey was always inside him. When that realization settles in, a deep silence appears, not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of understanding. It's the same silence that was there at the beginning of the journey, only now transfigured. The circle closes, and as it closes, it opens again. Because the path of light has no end, the temple continues to be built forever, and every seeker who awakens becomes a living stone in that infinite work. So what was hinted at in the first pages of Wilmshurst is fully revealed at the end. Freemasonry isn't an institution. It's a way of awakening human consciousness to its own luminous nature. It's the art of rebuilding the eternal temple within yourself. And what's most unsettling is that even after all of this, we've only touched the surface of the mystery. We still haven't talked about how that inner temple shows up in your crises, your relationships, the strange synchronicities that seem to follow you once you start waking up. There's a next step in this journey, mapping in real life how the legend of Hiram, the lost word, and the rebuilt temple show up in your life today. Even if you're not a Mason, if you want me to open up that next layer in another video, comment down below. I want a continuation. If enough people ask, we'll dive in together. If you made it this far, it means you really enjoyed our content. So make sure to check out our profile. There are a lot of videos you're still going to love. We have videos on the biographies of Aleister Crowley, Helena Blavatsky, Pythagoras, Plato, Manly P. Hall, and other great masters. We also have documentaries on magic, sacred geometry, Kabbalah, esotericism, occultism, spirituality, and many other themes that can make a real difference in your life. Feel free to leave your suggestion in the comments for future videos. You'll save years of study in just a few minutes of your day by watching our videos. I promise you, you're going to learn a lot with us. Hit the like button down below to support our work. Your like helps YouTube recommend more videos like this one to you. And save this video to a study or meditation playlist so you can come back to it later. If you enjoyed it, comment so I know. With the phrase, I want a continuation. That's how I'll know you truly liked it, and I'll make more videos like this. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Only you can help this knowledge reach more. People, share this video on social media, in groups, and with at least 3 friends. Knowledge is the only tool that can truly change the world. And you're changing it right now, because a mind that expands the entire universe at the same time. Only you can help this video reach more people. I'm truly grateful to have you here with me on this journey. Now, click on one of the videos that's going to pop up on your screen. Every video on this channel was made to awaken the best version of you.